We're really old up here.
Well, we're going to be talking.
Longer than you've been born.
We're going to be talking about really old stuff. We are going to go back to before motion pictures literature and novels that influenced the filmmakers. And a very popular genre of novel was explorers, adventurers. Just think of Indiana Jones, except in Jules Verne day, and you can get right up to
You can get Alan Quatermain,
though.
She, H. Rider Haggard She. A lot of these were the hero inevitably ends up in the clutches of some lost civilization, that sort of thing. Well, except for the lost civilization that were dead, so close. But it was an era, it was such an era of exploration, 19th century we're talking primarily there. And with the advance of printing and the rise of both, not so much novels as magazines. So many of these stories originally appeared serialized in magazines. Although that's actually how most of Charles Dickens' books first appeared too. But that was the big trend in the 19th century in popular fiction, was the serialized novel, because it would keep you coming back and buying a new whatever magazine it was, Penny Dreadful, every week. And so when you look at somebody like Marion C. Cooper or Ernest Schoedsack, that was part of their formative growing up, was reading those type of adventure stories. And then they went and had those adventures.
They carried that tradition into the motion picture.
Into the motion picture industry. Both of them were pilots in World War I. In the 1920s, they got into documentary filmmaking and traveled to exotic spots all over the world to capture primitive cultures and get them on screen.
Primitive cultures.
Primitive
cultures. Remember primitive cultures.
It's going to come back a lot.
Now, just to link up some continuity from the last program about yokai, here is our yokai. These are called emi-bazu. The emi-bazu, which were kind of like kappa. If you're familiar with kappa, they're little imps or goblins that hide in rivers and drown bad children, only the bad children. And out on the ocean, we had these giant things called emi-bazu, and they would tip over ships, capsize sailing boats, and make sailors disappear. So when, sadly, sailors never returned from the sea, it was, they're at the emi-bazu again.
The explanation.
What else could it be? It had to be the emi-bazu.
To cut to the chase a little bit, for those of you who weren't here last year, the basic thesis that I pitched to Martin Auld when I first came up with the idea for the panel of Cinema Symbiosis was The Lost World, 1925, written by Arthur Conan Doyle as a novel, the creator of Sherlock Holmes, of course, one of the 4 Professor Challenger novels, filmed by Willis O'Brien, who went on to do King Kong. So, we have Lost World, 1925 begets King Kong, 1933, which A.G. Subaraya sees theatrically at that time, and he is so mesmerized that that's what draws him into the motion picture industry and getting into creating special effects. Then from King Kong, we go, of course, that gets rolled through Son of Kong, Mighty Joe Young, many other things. Then we hit the early 50s. We've already established...
The Beast from 20,000 Fathoms.
Well, yeah, what we've established with King Kong is the concept of the ancient beast being brought into the modern world, which also occurs in The Lost World. In the novel The Lost World, the explorers bring back from the, rather than an island, it's an Amazon plateau that does not exist. This huge plateau in the Amazon, which is pretty funny because it's not volcanic there. So you get plateaus.
But there had been real exploration in this general area in the newspapers at the time. So it was current to readers of the newspaper, and then Doyle wrote this fictional account.
Right. And in the novel version, they bring back a pterodactyl egg as their proof, because everybody's killed except like 3 or 4 people in the whole adventure. They have no proof stuff happens. They bring this egg back, it hatches, and the damn pterodactyl flies away. Well, that's not a very satisfying movie ending. So for the film version, they captured a brontosaurus and brought it back to London. And here we go, the first time ever in motion picture history. Monster from an ancient world runs amok in big city, stomps on people, and gets away, which is unique.
The brontosaurus swims away.
Swims down the Thames River, never to be seen again. Whether we made it back to Brazil, we'll never know. But this establishes a theme. Then we get...
But Willis O'Brien also, I like to point out, Willis O'Brien, the father of stop motion photography, introduced several trademarks. One of them is a brontosaurus snarling its lip, which we see the first time here in The Lost World. And then Lost World begat King Kong. And here's the brontosaurus with a nice row of teeth, snarling again. So bring us up to speed from Lost World to King Kong.
So we've established that concept. Then we enter the nuclear age. And so now atom bombs are dredging up. Yes.
We've got set up. Explorers go to a remote island which is trapped in the past, bring a living object, here a giant ape, into the big city. The giant critter gets loose, wrecks up the big city.
Hilarity ensues.
Hilarity ensues. Here, it's for business. Denham is bringing King Kong to make money. Millions, boys.
I'll share it with all of you.
All of you. So
I can see up at the lights of Broadway.
You got it.
don't worry, those are chrome steel chains.
Yeah.
So the enterprise, the money-making element is brought in here. So now, here's some scenes that may look familiar in other movies, but then we move up to the atomic age.
And now creatures from an ancient time are dredged up due to atomic testing. Ooh. So we get that little spin first on Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and again we end up with a monster stuff down in New York.
This monster just comes to New York. It's not brought.
Yeah, well, I think I've seen the same explanation used in a couple of movies, and it might have been in this one too, was that he was seeking a more tropical climate like where he had lived before. That's the same baloney they gave us in The Deadly Mantis. He's flying south because it'll be more like the ancient jungles where he originally lived. But it's the silliest movie, I love it.
Well, they always end up in the civilized world where there are people around, but it makes for a good film, but it doesn't make sense logically.
Yeah, I mean, if they just flew over the desert and landed in a jungle and were never seen again, we'd all be very bored.
Right. Yeah. It's the same thing with '98 Godzilla. He's a burrower. This is a great place he can hide in a city of 4 million people.
A
right?
great island.
Right.
Great island.
Great island, right? Surrounded by water.
Right.
So then, this is where Godzilla, Beast from 20,000 Phantoms
Leads to Godzilla, and then other much more hilarity ensues.
I'm going to skip right over the giant behemoth. If you have any.
Well, we can refer back to it when we're talking about Gorgo because they're tied together.
Right.
Yeah.
Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, Giant Behemoth, and Gorgo were all directed by Eugene Lowry, or what is your pronunciation? Laurier. But I guarantee you when he worked in Hollywood, he's called Eugene Lowry. Laurier was probably correct. Who was an art director and photographer as well as director, and it seemed like he was almost making the same movie over and over again over a 15-year period.
I will clear up that misunderstanding soon. But
Go for it.
for some reason, I don't have very many pictures of Godzilla. I think you know what that monster looks like, and you get the idea.
Epic fail.
But Beast from 20,000 Phantoms came first. I'm pretty sure Mr. Tanaka saw the American dinosaur movie, which has become radioactive, and they kind of dropped the radioactive storyline in the movie. Then the blood has some infectious disease in it. They're not really saying the radioactivity from the American test is killing people. They're just somehow this old animal has a disease in its blood that's making everybody sick. But Mr. Tanaka must have seen this movie and said, that's a good idea. So the idea of the giant monster loose in the city has gone from London to New York City. And now we go to Tokyo, and Godzilla is totally tied to the headlines. And that's something I like about these monster movies is there's often a subtext. There's something else going on in the news that's referred to in the movie. And yeah, you may have heard something, the Japanese people may have heard something about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so that was still kind of current, and probably more relevant to the residents of Tokyo would be the horrible fire bombings. The United States Army Air Force lit up the whole town in early '45, and that was more immediate to the people in Tokyo, because they heard, yeah, in this city down south, they dropped one bomb and it blew the whole town up. So they said, great, every city we know has been burned up. So
not like this.
See, nobody really understood what the weapon was.
Unless you saw it.
Right, in 1945. And so the flames, just a city in fire. And here's where I give my pitch about Japan. What makes Japan so unique? Because fire, if you've ever been to Japan and visited, I make a lot of generalizations about Japan. I'm not a racist. I love Mexican food, so I can't be a racist. But I will make some generalizations about the Japanese people. So when you tour Japan, everything you visit is going to say, da, 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 and this burned down in 1710, and this is a reconstruction. Everything burned down, except I think for the Hajime Castle, the big castle like as seen in the James Bond film,
right.
You Only Live Twice. Everything else is burned down in Japan and been rebuilt. So the Japanese people know fire. They know earthquake because they're on the Pacific Plate. Typhoons. The typhoons, like American hurricanes, they call them typhoons in Asia. These things slam into the southwest Japan, where the Kansai Plain and the Tokyo Plain, the two main populated areas of Japan, just get hammered with typhoons. And Japan is an island nation like England, but Japan is kind of unique because the whole place is like a big mountain range and everybody lives on the shore. To begin with, I understand that no point in Japan is more than 70 miles from the ocean, which is fascinating. And then most people live very close to the ocean. Not that many people live in the mountains.
Only 12% of the land in Japan is arable, meaning can be used for agriculture.
The rest is like a medical.
It's if you see those mountains they're going through in like Gira and Gargantuas, that's what it's like. There are no cross-Japan highway that you get on to go to the other. Everything goes along the coast by boat.
So the people, they live from the ocean. Besides being afraid of typhoons, all the food comes from the ocean, transportation, of course, and even communication. I was reading that people found out what was going on by boats coming up and down the coast and spreading the news. So communication, transportation, food, everything depends on
all of it's very, very close to the coastline. I wanted to play out real quick because you mentioned the firebombing and everything. One of the things that's so interesting to watch as a progression in the Godzilla films is in the first Gojira, everything bursts into flames at the drop of a hat. Well, a lot of that had to do with just the same thing he was talking about all the other cities. Everything was made of wood and paper, major construction materials. It was only well after World War II, and we stuck our nose in and told them how to do their society right, because we're Americans, that's what we do, that they started moving into modern construction technique, concrete, steel, all that. I mean, there are brick buildings, but an amazing amount of Tokyo was made of very flammable wood at the time Godzilla was filmed. And if you watch the movies, each time Tokyo gets attacked, there's less emphasis on stuff being on fire and more emphasis on buildings getting knocked over, because now they're concrete and stuff rather than just wood that bursts into flames at the drop of a hat. So you will see a change, especially between, say, the original Gojira, say, Rodan, and up to, by the time you get to Mothra, there's not much fire at all. It's stuff getting knocked down. So it's an interesting change. And also you start to see the rise of skyscrapers as you move into the early 60s, and in films like Gorath as well. A lot of the scientific buildings in Gorath were actually exciting new buildings that had just been built, and they filmed on location because they were very modern and futuristic looking.
And even the architecture has something to do with the subtext of the movies. The writers of the recent Mr. Mamura and the other writers were saying that the buildings, if a Japanese person sees the building that Godzilla's attacking, they get the message. Like when Godzilla's attacking the tax building in Shinjuku, they know, wow.
We're oblivious, but they get it.
So a couple of things I wanted to mention about these subtexts were they're lost in time. I'll keep coming back to Lost in Time. In 1956 American Godzilla King of the Monsters, does anybody remember why Steve Martin is flying to Tokyo?
He's on to Cairo.
He's on the way to Cairo, very good. And what was Cairo in 1956? The Suez Crisis. In 1956, if you read the newspapers, there was big trouble in the Suez. Egypt and Israel, there was big trouble brewing. And so you have said, of course Steve Martin, like all reporters, would be flying to Tokyo on the way to Cairo. But later that year, the Suez Crisis exploded into actual combat, though. We don't hear much about it. It's not politically correct to talk about the Suez Crisis now, but there was a big deal in 1956. And also, like I was saying in Godzilla, the World War II, the refugees, the bombing, the hunger, it's all reflected. And in Rodan, remember in the beginning of Rodan, all the miners are fighting? Mm-hmm. And we just go like, oh yeah, that's the way miners are. Anyway,
there's more to it than that.
In Kyushu, there was a long simmering labor dispute at the Niike mines. And so if you saw a movie in Japan in 1956 with Kyushu miners fighting, you knew that they were fighting whether unionized or not. And union goons were beating up people. And later they had riots. After the movie came out, there were riots in the mines down there, and it was a great big deal, and it led to reforming of the Japanese mining industry, and on and on and on. There's all kinds of little subtext clues to real events. So, speaking of Rodan, was I speaking of Rodan? This is where the King brothers get involved, and there's not much information that I could find about the King brothers, but they were your classic Hollywood low-level producers, not really in the studio system. They were like in Gower Gulch, Poverty Row. They worked with PRC Productions and Monogram Pictures, but they did excellent movies. Dillinger and a movie called Gun Crazy. Anybody here seen Gun Crazy?
Oh yeah.
Yes.
I love Gun Crazy. Yes, exactly. Great stuff. Great movie. King Brothers. That was Gun Crazy was a young Russ Tamlin as he's the kid. Yeah, he plays the star as a kid. Right. He's a young teenager. And I got a chance to chat with Russ Tamlin about that movie. Anyway, the King Brothers made really high grade, low budget exploitation, sensational thrill movies. But then they caught on to science fiction. And they bought Rodan from the Japanese, from Toho, I guess. They Americanized it. George Takei tells a great story about that was his first job in the entertainment industry, was looping or dubbing voices in Rodan. And he said one of the King brothers was in the studio while they were looping, and he was sweaty and drunk and smoking a cigar and yelling at him, get more excited, yell more, you're scared, a big monster's scaring you, get in there. And he was intimidated by the King brothers. And then when they were done editing the movie, and they brought in a real talent like Paul Frees, one of the main voices, a voice actor in Rodan is Paul Frees. And I think Rodan is a very good Americanized movie. They did weird things by making, they did some funny things, if you know the original Rodan, the American Rodan. But when they were done with it, they sold it to RKO, who promptly folded, and I guess they sold it to Warner Brothers. But that was the King brothers Americanized these movies and then handed the finished movie to the big studio, for distribution. And not much is known. I can't learn much about the King brothers, but they did a great job. And they just seemed like great guys. Like they were apparently criminals. And they drank and they cheated everybody. They owed people money and they were tax dodgers. And I guess these guys at Gower and Sunset smoking cigars. I see here. Here's what we're going to do with this picture. It's a fabulous picture. Giant flying monster. It just sounds great. Anyway, when they wrapped this thing up in like 57, it seems like they went right on to Gorgo, planning Gorgo, with Eugene Laurier, who directed Beast from 20,000 Fathoms and the hideous, the horrible, the giant behemoth, which I don't want to talk about. So they contact Laurier and said, how'd you like to make another giant monster? He said, sure, why not? And this must have been around 58 or so. And August Vergoni just told me that the Toho was just finalizing their deal with Columbia around 58, because that fits in between the H-Man and Battle in Outer Space. And if Toho had a deal with Columbia for 3 pictures, they did a 3-picture deal, they would not have been able to do another deal with the King brothers, because they're already, hitched to Columbia. So most sources say that the King brothers went to Japan trying to set this movie up there because they wanted to make their own Japanese monster movie, and it didn't work out. So some elements of the original Japanese story stayed in Gorgo, but that's when they went back to Laurier, who was a Russian, I guess a Russian Jew, who had a French name and lived in the United States, and everybody thought he was English. So when they pitched the movie to him, he says, great, I'll make it in Paris. If we can't make it in Tokyo, we'll have the monster attack Paris. But that didn't work out. And then the King brothers got a really good deal from the English film industry, which was struggling in like 59. So they made some tax incentives, and everything was reasonably priced. And they got top-notch talent. Tom Howard for special effects, and
Jack Cardiff shoot it.
Freddie
Francis.
Freddie Francis, one of the greatest cinematographers, Academy Award-winning.
Oh yeah, and did a lot of directed some stuff too for Hammer.
Sure,
he had a great career, but he was definitely a high-end cinematographer to have for Gorgo.
So again, the King brothers made Gorgo, and then they moved on up all the way to the top, MGM. They sold the finished movie to MGM, and MGM did a sensational marketing job. I guess the King brothers got MGM to spend all the money for prints and advertising, and so they did a slamming job of promoting and advertising the movie. And I do remember the promotion for it, and I remember when I saw this movie in the theater in 1960, I stayed all Saturday. I must have seen it 2 or 3 times. In those days, kids, you didn't have to get run out of the theater at the end of the movie. They showed 2 movies, and you could just sit there and watch the same 2 movies all day long. Anyway, Nick, you haven't said a word.
Oh, well, you gotta get in between you two edgewise, but we're gonna stick with Gorgo for a little while. Of course, what I remember seeing Gorgo was after, seeing Godzilla first and seeing the fact that it looks like, they're trying to take on Gorgo there in England. Okay, so this is the English version of Godzilla, but the difference being, of course, with the young Gorgo, of course, that they take into the arena, basically, the carnival, to show it off and all that. I thought that idea was actually very interesting. Later, kind of learning that it's kind of got its roots back into King Kong. The idea of a sensational monster for all the kids to see. Bring the family, bring them all to see the tortured creature.
It was Laurier who wanted to bring it down to the child's point of view. Okay. That's why.
Yeah, the kid character.
The kid character.
Kenny.
The
Kenny.
Oh, Nick Kenny or whatever.
Nick Kenny, yeah, there you go. He's Irish.
He is not communicating with the monster, but understanding the monster, empathizing with the monster.
It's like he instinctively knows that the whole thing is wrong, and he can't convince anybody. He plays Cassandra through the whole movie. I was going to inject something simply because you didn't want to talk about Giant Behemoth at all because you hate it. And it is a pretty boring movie. But what is interesting is, again, is that the radioactive component turns up in Giant Behemoth. He's not just a brontosaurus type, he's a brontosaurus that has a radioactive, I don't know, was it a ray or a breath or something?
He
just didn't show it up. He's like, yeah, you're good. And it's never explained where that comes from.
Did they tie it into
it's not like,
testing?
no, there's not like there's any North Sea nuclear testing that we know of. No. But again, that's Lurie carrying over a theme from Beast of 20,000 Statues. There's so much recycling is a lot of the point we're making. But it's not just recycling, it's reinterpreting. You know, taking these little basic theme ideas. Again, when Gorgo turns up, he's not found, outside a major city in Ireland. He's found off the coast of this little primitive island of fishermen. Again, it's the simple people. And usually the simple people are inclined to believe that there are such creatures and it's best to be wary of them and appease them as gods or whatever. And then the civilized people can go, well, we know what's what, and they all get everybody killed.
See, this is where Godzilla starts with the lost past, or trapped in the past.
The Odo Islanders.
The Odo Islanders have their own parallel explanation for Godzilla, which really doesn't make any sense. But anyway, they have a myth, and they live a pre-industrial agricultural.
Well, and supposedly they used to put a virgin on a boat once a year and float it out for Godzilla or whatever was out there to eat. Presumably they just drowned or eaten by sharks or whatever. But then comes real Godzilla along to fulfill the vision of that legend. So it's like, well, we told you all along there was a Godzilla out there.
But we have this dichotomy of like a rural, pre-industrial, agricultural, lost in the past environment, sometimes with its own belief system.
Right.
And like King Kong, the natives, and Gorgo, the suspicious people that speak Gaelic. They don't speak English. Remember, they're muttering and they don't trust the English scavengers. And so that's a nice stand-in. And also it's convenient, the island is called Nara, which is a place in Japan and also a society. I guess there's an age of Nara. That was an old kingdom or principality. So we've got Lurie, the European man, bringing his he credits his child, his daughter, as influenced him because he said his daughter wanted the monster to live at the end. Because in most of these other movies, the monsters die. Godzilla, Rodan, doesn't end so good for the monster. You always pity the monster.
But they have to die.
But
It's
they
like
have
the
to
ritual,
die.
King Kong. They have to die.
Oh, pity, I feel so sorry for Kong now. Anyway.
But that's a wonderful touch, and it leaves it as kind of like a warning for mankind. You know, leave the monster alone. Just get out of his way.
And they might end in different ways with, at least in Gorgo, the monster lives, and then we started seeing some of the other monsters kind of ending in different ways, other monster flicks. But at least in a lot of these, the beginnings kind of always kind of followed the same pattern. It beginning with a disaster. In Gorgo, this volcano rising out of the sea, just unexplainably. Godzilla with, fishermen. Again, with the fisherman aspect out there, which was more real life. It would be almost like, of course, if a month after 9/11 had happened, we came out with a movie that reflected planes destroying buildings by terrorists. Godzilla came out, I think, something like 6 months after a disaster in Japan with a fishing boat.
Right.
The bikini, the Lucky
Fortune
Dragon,
Dragon.
Fortune Dragon, Lucky Dragon number 5. And so, they all kind of begin with that idea of getting your attention with a disaster. Whether that disaster woke this creature from a slumber, whether it's a result of the creature actually his presence being there, what have you, or fishing boats just starting to disappear, what have you there. They all kind of do have that same formula at the beginning, but they're switching things over to, do we let the monster live or not? Is he going to be able to coexist with humanity, or is it well, we empathize with him, but it's either us or him, so it's him. He's got to die. So what I liked about Gorgo and the Behemoth, actually, let me go back to Behemoth, because you watch Behemoth, because I know Richard loves it. Watch Behemoth. Actually, watch Behemoth.
You've got to see it once. You've never
just
seen
gotta
it.
see
It is in the pantheon of these films. It is, key for many reasons. It was the last film where O'Brien really did any serious work.
Well, yeah, and his budget was so cut down. Imagine
Yeah.
he
Although,
he
keep
had
in
the
mind,
talent.
he produced the effects. He was not the hand-on animator.
Right.
At that point, he was really old.
But had he was given the budget, yes, we would have gotten a lot more visual effects shot. The visual effects in Behemoth are quite minor, and there's a lot of filler.
Yeah, and there's repeat shots. You'll see some of the same shots. There's
one
one where he
repeat
steps
shot
on a car like 3 times. It's the same car.
Sometimes flipped or whatever, but yeah, whatever you can do to just fill it in there. But yeah, see Behemoth for that reason. Gorgo, what I appreciate that is it did get away from the stop motion animation. Now they're taking a nod from Japan, Suitimation,
Right.
because Suitimation we're finding it's not that it's more or less expensive. It's more along the lines of time. How much time do you have to dedicate to the production here? Suitimation buys you the time, whereas stop motion, looking very impressive, takes a ton of time.
I think there's another difference though, and I think Gojira proves this. Is that I don't really think suitmation is the best way to. Stop motion is the best way to go with these kind of things because suitmation and miniatures and Fuller's Earth, dust and pyrotechnics built in live create a natural randomness that cannot be accomplished with stop motion. And you need only watch the Rhedosaurus come through a brick wall and just watch it. And your eye is telling you that every one of those bricks has been manipulated from frame to frame to frame. It's like, oh look, he animated 728 bricks. And that's what it looks like. It doesn't have the chaotic randomness of real destruction. And I don't think if they spent 7 years on Godzilla trying to animate it, that they would have created anything as impressive as they did with the guy in the suit smashing fantastically detailed miniatures and real flames erupting, not animated in or matted in.
And the way Mr. Tsuburaya could special photograph miniature water, the way he made like those waves, nobody since, either in the United States or Japan, as far as I can tell, could do that miniature water.
I've always wondered if he invented the wave generator that they use, because
he was the greatest as just because he did all those war movies, all those ships.
Oh, yeah.
at sea.
the battle for the Japan Sea and Hawaii, the Pearl Harbor attacks.
He mastered
It's
that water
stunning.
stuff, which you won't see in a stop motion movie.
Watch something as recent as Logan's Run and look at the water around the city. It looks like an electric train set with little pools of water in plastic. It looks no sense of scale whatsoever. I think it stuns me that won an Oscar for special effects when the city miniatures look so crappy.
So,
Because of the water.
in all this talk of oops.
Oh, I wonder when you were going to get to that.
Well, I was just going to say, is there any other movie that Gorgo reminds you of? And
Well, one
give
point
you a
for
hint
one,
by
the
saying
monster
that.
gets away at the end. Hint, hint. I will tell you real quick. You remember, those of you who were 2 years ago when we did Ifukube 100, there was a young man here from Japan who showed his wonderful movie about what happens if a kaiju ends up dead on the coast of this Japanese village, and the government has to deal with it, and people there have to deal with it. It was a very, very clever movie. And he was assistant director to Higuchi on Attack on Titan. And his name was Kazuhiro Nakagawa. Very handsome young man, about 27 years old. And quite by coincidence, because he showed up with thinking that he would just be able to get a room at GFest during the convention. I'd just get a room. No, didn't happen.
Parking space.
So Jeff Horn called and said, "You still have space in your room?" I said, "Yeah." Met this guy, and he had a great time. His film was very, very good. I believe he did. I'm not positive. He was going to be working on Shin Gojira. I don't know whether he has or not. He ended up because he was working as an assistant director to Higuchi, who co-directed. But anyway, we're up in the room after the concert and the drinking and the partying and all that, at 2 in the morning, and I flip on the in-house TV and Gorgo is on, and he's never seen it. This is a huge, he works for Toho, he loves kaiju movies, Never seen it, had never heard of it. And I said to him very simply, well, this is the movie that Gappa rips off.
Definitely.
But it's not the only movie that there are borrowings from.
So therefore, I was just going to say, an issue or two ago in GFen, Mike Bowe wrote a great article about Gorgo versus Mothra, and he compared favorably the two movies where you have, the movies, an entity is brought from an island into the big city against its will, and then a parent or parent figure monster, much larger, comes, wrecks everything, only to rescue the captured entity, the baby dinosaur in Gorgo and the twin fairies, the little beauties in Mothra. And the monster itself is not trying to hurt anybody, but it must to carry out its mission of rescue. The monster is an obsessed hero, which is focused on one task. It's got to get those little beauties or the baby and return back where it came from. It's not out to destroy humanity. It just wants to restore order. Wants to restore order. And it was entrepreneurs, greedy humans, that brought the monster to the big city. Capitalist pigs caused the kaiju rampage. And it goes on and on and on. There's spiritual elements in both Gorgo and Mothra.
Well, and you also get
Coincidence?
Catholic pigs in Godzilla.
Yeah.
Same racket. They want to exploit the egg, and they'd like to buy the two beauties. It's like,
sure.
Yeah, just let's buy some people, why don't we?
But we're looking at 1 year, 1961. What a coincidence. Mothra came out, I'm confused. Did Mothra come out first and then Gorgo? Regardless, that's not important now. My memory's not important now. I was surprised to realize that the King brothers had Gorgo principal photography going in the summer of '59. I'm not sure whether it was special effects or principal photography, but they were filmed, the cameras were rolling in the summer of '59, and Mr. Tanaka didn't start asking for story ideas from the three men who contributed the story till the summer of '60. Gorgo must have been like in full production when Tanaka got this idea. Hey, what if... Now, I have a very cynical idea about the movie industry, because I'm from Hollywood, and I think if somebody's in one room saying, I got an idea about a monster that goes to Tokyo, you hear a typewriter in another room where somebody's writing your script in that room. This happens. That's why people won't let people tell them. You may hear screenwriters say people want to tell them their script, and they go, don't tell me your script, because when I get the same idea independently of you, I don't want you to accuse me of ripping you off. So
this is also why all the movie studios, if you send them your script, it will be returned unopened if you're lucky. But they will never acknowledge having looked at it, because 18 years down the line, you may sue them, because even independently, they come up with a similar idea from your idea. You could still sue them and might be able to shake them down for $200,000. It's just not worth it to them. So they will send your script back.
So,
if you do not have a literary agent, you will not get a script anywhere in Hollywood.
So I believe that somehow the discussion with Japanese movie people in 1959, I believe the King brothers were in Tokyo trying to get this movie made. Somehow these ideas percolated around the Japanese movie industry, and then Mothra appeared. And Mothra is so important because Mothra was the first fantasy film where they didn't really try to explain anything. It just was a giant moth. And my belief is without the success of Mothra, you would not have had King Kong versus Godzilla the way it came out when it came out. I'm sure there was going to be another Godzilla movie, but the similarities between this little picture here and King Kong versus Godzilla. It's the first Godzilla color movie, first widescreen scope movie, and there's so many elements from Mothra in King Kong.
Well, you again have the islanders, the natives, the whole deal. And not only that,
red berry juice.
But red berry juice, but also tone. The tone is much lighter.
They're just in King Kong versus Godzilla. Nobody's surprised that there's Godzilla. Nobody's surprised there's a giant ape. Oh, King Kong, go get him, bring him into Tokyo. Everybody goes, of course there's a giant monster out there. It's accepted. And I have been told by a very famous person who's not in this room, I hope, that I'm full of beans, I have no idea what I'm talking about, that Toho would never rip off the King brothers.
Oh, that guy.
You know.
Yeah, I know who that guy.
www or hashtag zip it.
Yeah.
I gotta drop the www dot routine and hashtag zip it.
Yeah.
Anyway,
move into 2016.
I believe that there was percolation, there was cinema symbiosis, and that's where I kind of wrapped this thing up with Gorgo.
Well, see, you had to charge so hard ahead. Now we got 20 minutes to kill.
But
If I could, actually, real quick.
Go.
Gorgo, if you've not seen Gorgo, obviously this is one that I think a lot of us would say you really need to see it. But
It's $10 in the dealer's room. Go buy it. You'll be glad you
the
did.
Blu-ray is very, very nice.
Yeah, they did. They really did a nice restoration recently, and it's well worth having the high quality new versions of it.
But fast forward to the 1990s, before the '98 Godzilla, you have Steven Spielberg's Lost World, sequel to Jurassic Park, and you've got similarities between the original Lost World story and all the remakes that have come along the lines with adventures trying to go into an island, survive amongst the dinosaurs, bring one back, and then you had switch it over sort of to the Gorgo story, actually, where the parent is trying to find the child in the arena that they're going to put it on display for the public so they can make money from it. And so, of course, the mother runs amok in the city to take it over and destroy everything in its path. But it's really just trying to find its child. And so, watch Lost World, Steven Spielberg's Lost World, and you're seeing a lot of elements from Gorgo, actually. And I don't think Steven Spielberg I think he'll admit that, honestly. I think he'll admit that I took elements from that. I mean, he took the name The Lost World anyways. But Gorgo, unfortunately, does not breathe fire. That was one of the things as a kid. I was like, well, what does he do? Well, he's kind of like Godzilla without the fire. He's got big fingernails. And he can smash London very well, actually. He smashes Tower Bridge, and there's a lot of repeat shots of that. One thing about Gorgo that I kind of didn't like, you watch it actually, you see there's a lot of color differences in the shots. Some of the shots in even the Blu-ray, I thought maybe they would have corrected for some of those shots, but you see a lot of shots that don't have really good color correction to them. It's probably kind of like when you see the original Godzilla, you see damage to the film. That damage is permanent. Scratches, little nick marks in them. Well, that's perhaps permanent, actually, even in Gorgo.
I'm very excited to report that there's now another version of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the Bomb. I got the thing on 2 VHS tapes, 3 DVDs, at least 1 Blu-ray, and now there's another Blu-ray version.
Criterion's coming out.
Criterion.
Of course they are.
But Kubrick, the perfectionist, he was such a cheapskate when he's filming Strangelove that he took any film he could find, black and white stock. So it's printed on different film stocks. The inner positives or dupes.
Right.
He just to save money, he said, you got a couple 100 feet of black and white film, give it to me. And so that's why there's all these contrast problems trying to match it up. But they supposedly fixed all that for the Criterion version. Anyway,
I was going to interject. A lot of the problem with the early Toho films, up through like 58, 59, is the type of film stock they were using, and this is especially true with Godzilla and the early color films, is it had a very, very soft emulsion. There was the emulsion is the coating on the film that holds the picture, and it's a photochemical reaction, and it was just soft, and so just the wear and tear of going through printers in the editing process, a fleck of dust causes a scratch, a hair gets in the gate. These films are very easily damaged. A terrible example of that, a good terrible example of that, is if you watch The Mysterians. The movie looks fine. The special effects shots comparatively look like crap. If you really look close, you will see scratches, dots, flecks of color, because they went through more generations as elements were assembled, and with that soft film emulsion, they had a problem keeping the quality up, and you can really see a graininess and a dirtiness to the special effects shots of The Mysterians. That is solved by the time of Battle in Outer Space, and it's because they were using new film stocks from America that had a firmer emulsion that resisted damage much more.
Isn't Rodin the big difference that they actually printed it on Technicolor film? Instead of the Eastman, it was filmed on Eastman film stock, but when they printed it, they used...
Are you talking in Japan or here?
America.
Yeah.
United States version.
Yeah, well, you leave that to the King brothers.
And they may have taken... Anyway, as the clock moves on, we don't have to get out of here at 4, but I have a dinner date. I made a reservation at a very luxurious Chicago hot dog stand. So
real quick, there it is.
we're coming to Islands.
Islands. We wanted to talk a little more about islands because Kong introduced this concept, even though it triggers back to the island, to the plateau on the Lost World, the 25 Lost World, which if you see a restored version, by the way, it really is a must-see movie for fans. But in that film, they had one kind of primitive man lurking around. It was Bull Montana, the stuntman, played this kind of semi-ape man on the island. So, but they didn't really have names. They had this one ape man that's kind of watching.
The girl was different. The girl was from the lower village.
Yeah.
The pretty girl, but up. There's only one person living
up on the mountaintop. But when we get to Kong, suddenly we're creative entire native cultures out of whole cloth, including dancing styles, music, makeup, whatever. And the wonderful Noble Johnson, terrific actor who was the chief. He is also the Nubian in The Mummy with
He's in a lot of cowboy movies too.
With Karloff.
Yes.
But he's in a lot of good stuff in the early 30s. But so we have this native culture, and then it's like each one of these movies going into the 50s, Toho runs wild with this idea.
The island is always like another place, another time. In Godzilla's Revenge, which I did the audio commentary on, it's like the child's world. It's the kid's brain is Monster Island.
I wanted to interject at the end of our speech. If you don't have it, see if you can get a hold of the classic media of Godzilla's Revenge, one of the most reviled Godzilla movies. You listen to Richard's commentary, it will become one of your favorite films.
70 minutes of me talking.
It's wonderful.
It's like they said, all monsters attack, just so you know.
Right now,
all monsters attack.
In Toho's wisdom, they said, well, take Godzilla's name off it and call it, let's see, All Monsters Attack, so nobody will know what the movie is. Anyway, does anybody recognize this island?
Yes.
Destroy all monsters. And what's the name of Monsterland? And what geographical location? Ogasawara Island.
You get out here and do the
So important. So important. Let's go back. There it is again. This is actually a big model. That's not a matte painting. The men would stand about half as tall, or the mountains on this island are about half as tall as the technicians. They actually built that in the water. I'm screwing this up.
In the big tank, probably.
I may have been one of the smaller ones. I could have been, I'm not sure. So what I'd like to do is get you all involved and name the islands.
Name that island.
It's pretty easy. What's the name of this island?
Odo Island.
Odo Island, which may or may not be part of the Ogasawara chain.
By the way, in Japan, because the island thing appeals to the Japanese sensibility because they are an island country. They do all live close to the coast. Richard pointed out earlier, you can live in England your whole life, and it's an island country, and never see the sea. Because it's all arable. There are farmlands all over England. There's no need to go to the coast. It's traversed with rivers and canals, whereas, as we said, Japan is this block of mountains and rocks that nobody can go over with a little thin line all the way around all the islands where you can actually habitate, live, grow food, and whatever. Of the 6,000 and some islands of Japan, only 450 are habitable. There are many, many uninhabited islands because they're just crappy to live on. You know, the climate's good, you can't grow any crops. Why would you go there? You'd
Like
be
Wake Island.
You'd be isolated from everything.
Who's ever been to Wake Island? I've been to Wake Island. Anyway.
The island where
so what's-
Matango was filmed was an uninhabited island, for example, I believe. I know, you got
Don't go there. Don't go there.
Go ahead.
Okay, so pretty easy. Where are we now?
I hope it's Infant.
Infant Island from the original Mothra. It's getting Faro, very good. It's more mountainous. This
Now-
is even more forbidding. Look at those peaks.
Faro Island is far away.
Just looks very unfriendly.
Yeah. And it's
It's not quite Skull Island, but it's a little more ominous.
so this is there's different stories about the name, but I don't have time for it now. Now here, where's that thing going? What's this?
Fact.
It's Mothra. Where's it going? What's that island?
Some Infant Island. The other one got destroyed.
In which movie?
Sea Monster.
Sea Monster. It's called Infant Island. And it's not Birth Island.
No,
That was later.
Birth Island is Space Godzilla.
Birth Island is later.
That's the
Beirut. Beirut. Where does Beirut?
Beirut, that one I can't remember either, but you know that island changed names even from Space
Right.
Godzilla to Destroya.
Right.
That I forget.
Bass Island.
Bass Island.
Somebody remind me real quick, in the American version of Mothra, Infant Island has a different name. What the heck is it? Does anybody remember?
Is that what they call it?
East.
No, that wasn't Easter Island. No, that was.
But they definitely don't call it Infant Island in that
No, they don't.
in the Columbia version of Mothra.
So
Nobody remembers it. I'm
Mothra's
shocked.
return to Infant Island. I have a prize. This is a
Lechty Island or Lech.
Mothra,
No, that's the islands from Sea Monster.
but that's where Mothra goes. Mothra goes to Lechty or Devil Island, gets the correct people, only the right people get
Right.
picked up,
They get in the basket.
and
Get
then
in the basket!
Mothra takes them back to Infant Island. So I think in the movie this is the return voyage to Infant Island, or Birth
This is the
Island.
last time.
Infant.
Infant. This is a return to Infant from Lechty, which in the American version they call Devil Island. Is that right?
Yeah.
Do I know what I'm talking about?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Red Bamboo.
Anyway, I'm going to be really unfair, and I guess just I don't know how to do this contest, but if somebody has an answer I really like, I'll give you this prize. It's a high grade number 6. The year is 1999. It's the first Millennium Godzilla. I got this in Japan in 1999, and it's been sitting inside its capsule ever since, mint in package with the original insert, and this is running probably $20 in the dealer's room.
What a deal. Such
Some
an offer.
lucky person will leave with this magnificent
Maybe.
Godzilla. Not you.
Obviously not.
No. Okay, so this is a big clue. Which island is this?
It's the one with the beautiful babe down in the corner there.
This is like Godzilla doing the Kong bit, looking at the girl. Very rarely does Godzilla look at a human, but he sees Kumi Mizuno, can't take his eyes off her.
Lechty Island or Devil's
Devil
Island. Godzilla's versus the Sea Monster.
Right.
Yep.
Very good. Everywhere versus Godzilla. Now, where have I brought us now?
Soldier?
Who said that?
Soldier?
Solgo. I think this is Son of Godzilla.
Yes.
So it's the Solgo Island.
Right.
And isn't it different in the American version? The two, don't they pronounce it slightly different in the two
Yeah,
dubs?
I forget. I think it's either a salt. I think it's
I think it's Sol-Gel when you see it written, but they pronounce it differently in each version. So this one has all the snow falling on it.
Right, at the very end.
And there it is. Oh, by the way, that backdrop is a magnificent example of the man whose name I don't have, but he used to use paintbrushes to do these enormous canvas backdrops, and later he got a spray gun, and one guy does all that stuff by hand for the whole 60s, and I know the guy's name, or I had the guy's name somewhere.
Which is the one where they have the whole fight? Is it
Destroy All Monsters
is
of
the
Mount
Gira,
Fuji.
the fight in front of Mount
Destroy All Monsters of Mount Fuji. And that same guy, just some little old man, would just sit there and just take him a couple days. Now that would be a collectible if you saw that. The warehouse-sized canvas backdrop.
Right.
And also we have the worst Godzilla suit. But the excellent greens work. In my commentary, I point out the uniformly great gardening work. The greensmen brought in all these miniature trees and plants, and you really don't notice how excellent they place these miniature plants for forced perspective to make Godzilla look bigger. They put the bigger trees in front, the smaller trees in back, and they really great work, great artwork.
and the kind of thing in a composition where it only looks right if you're looking through the lens. If you're looking from the side,
exactly,
it makes no sense why these trees are here. But they'll place things in the foreground, and then the great trick is getting the right focus level so that all of it works together.
You know,
They're masters of that.
My father worked at Walt Disney Studios, and I got a chance to see a couple movies in production, and one of them never worked out. They were going to make a giant wolf movie. They were going to have a wolf terrorizing a countryside. So they had like these ping pong tables with little villages with trees on it, and they wanted this wolf to walk through the scene. And the poor animal, I used to want to work with animals in movies, but nobody who loves animals wants to work with animals in movies. This poor wolf was terrified, and they were trying to get it to walk across this set, and it would step on the houses, and they're going, cut! Because they got to
it's a
rebuild.
perspective thing, yeah.
So they let me look, and it looked exactly like a railroad model set on a ping pong table, until they sprayed the mist, the smoke, and then they let me look through the viewfinder. This camera in those days, a massive Panavision camera. I looked through the viewfinder, and you'd swear you were looking at a countryside. I thought I was looking at Canada, and then you had to look back, and it looked so fake. But when you look at a viewfinder with the lens and that perspective, it's really magic. Anyway, we're getting close to the end now. So this is the mock-up of Ogawa Islands. I was going to tell you all about the Bonin Islands, Monster Island, right, which doesn't exist. I love this. I love that picture. I love that image. Love this movie, Monster Island. Oh,
Mondo Island.
Mondo Island, very good. And I was going to talk about Lagos, but that's another story altogether. The Bonin Islands were very exciting to me for history because there's this weird origin of Europeans. The United States discovered it and were the first people to live there. Or Spanish, Portuguese discovered it, Americans started living there, then suddenly Japan said, oh, we discovered it but forgot about it. So Japan claimed it. In World War II, it was very important during World War II because it was between Iwo Jima and Japan, and on the island Chichijima, and I just like to say Chichijima, I just love to say it. On Chichijima they had a observation post and radio station, there was probably radar, and they had to get rid of that island to successfully invade Iwo Jima, and that's where George Bush, the first president, was shot down. He had to bail out in the ocean. He was luckily rescued by a submarine. He was bombing the Bonin Islands. And then we occupied it. Then 1968, we gave it back to Japan just in time for Destroy All Monsters. And I believe that's why they make a big deal about the Bonin Islands in Destroy All Monsters, because it was in the newspapers. They were celebrating. We got our islands back, yay, from the Americans.
Those bastards.
Anyway, and now, right now, there's the Chinese are letting their fishing boats go into, and the Bonins are Tokyo. That's the city of Tokyo. The Bonin Islands are
They belong to, they're considered part
the
of,
prefecture. It's
in
Tokyo
a governmental
prefecture.
sense.
It's Tokyo.
Even though they're way the hell away.
Right, and there's no airport. You can't fly to the Bonin Islands. To get from Japan to the Bonin, it's like a 26-hour rough sea voyage. Wow. It's not for the weak of heart because the waters are very rough. And there's nothing much going on there, except they have lots of red coral, which is in very much demand for jewelry. So 1 month there were like 37 Chinese fishing boats poaching red coral, and they're just driving small boats over the reef, destroying the coral and scooping it up. It's a very invasive, extractive method of harvesting illegally the coral. And then a couple months later, 400 Chinese fishing boats were down there, and the Japanese government pitched a major complaint. Then all of a sudden, all 400 ships disappeared, and the Chinese government said, we have no idea what they were doing down there. And we told them, don't take that red coral anymore. But we don't know how they got down there. Well, obviously the government was controlling it, because you just don't have 400 ships appear and 400 ships disappear, and they're wrangling about it right now. So the Bonin Islands are very much in contention. So you talked so much. You stole the show from me. I'm going to let you have.
Oh, thank you.
Okay. Very good. I had a contest, but when I realized I botched up this projection thing completely, so I think I've said everything I wanted to say.
I would like to thank Richard, and I would like to encourage you, dig out, if you have never listened to it, or find it, if you can find it to buy, the classic media, Godzilla's Revenge. It will change your mind on this movie. Once you realize it's not a Godzilla movie, because that's really the trick.
Okay, let me see if I can fool the experts. If you're good, I need both the name of the movie in the movie and what's the real name of where the location where they filmed the movie. What movie is this from? It's one of the last special effects movies done under the old regime.
Space Amoeba?
Space Amoeba!
Yeah.
You are correct. Or
A.K. Yog.
Yog. And what's the name of the real island, which is the same island some of the location shots for Matango were filmed? Hachibo, I think Hachibo-jima Island, which is in the Izu chain, and the Chinese might be claiming that too.
Wow.
But that's again, that's part of Tokyo. The Izu chain and the Ogarasawa chain.
And that's the island that is, I can't, what's it, the name is a weird variation on Sergio Leone's name.
Yeah, Sergio.
I think it's Sergio in the subs, but it was meant to, because
Right.
the L and the R
Right.
in Japanese, they have a problem with that.
And-
The L and the R. So it's Sergio Island in your subtitles. But
Anybody
it was-
familiar with Space Amoeba? Does it,
Yog, Monster from
I've
Space.
heard of it.
Oh, you gotta get that movie. Yog, Monster from Space is awesome.
they call the island
Akira
Selgio?
Kubo,
Selgio?
Kenji Sahara's in it. I mean, it's got a great cast, great ridiculous monsters, the giant squid that walks around on the land,
Wow.
and the giant turtle. It was their attempt to do a kaiju movie without Godzilla. And it was the last gasp of the old studio system before everybody's dropped from contracts.
And they got rid of the special effects.
And it's so funny because of course it's set again on a little island. They have like 28 natives, really low budget, really cheap. They recycled the theme from King Kong versus Godzilla as the native chant because they couldn't afford to pay Kube to write new ones. But it's delightful.
It's got Akira Kubo's masterpiece where he's laughing at something, then he sees the monster and goes, ah! But just,
And also the doll
laughter
scene, the doll scene where he has to dive off a cliff to escape the monster, and it cuts to literally a Ken doll-sized doll grabbing a branch. And so, it's the cutest thing you ever saw. It's such a Subaraya-style thing to use this little doll. It's like the horse in Frankenstein Conquers the World, the little,
Yeah, the
horse.
horse.
Because he didn't really want you to think it was a real horse getting killed. It's just sort of like the idea of it. Let's just show you a little puppet horse. You get the idea.
Or when what's his name jumped out of the window and destroyed him.
Yes. I have said this for years and argued with people, but there's a level of the difference between representational and presentational. And I think Subaraya especially is like, I don't really want to show you something gory. I want you to understand what happened. The guy fell off a cliff. But I don't want it to look so real it's going to upset you and you're going to have nightmares about it.
It's Japanese artifice.
We
look at artifices negatively. Japan, if you
It's
make
charming
convincing
to them.
artifice, they love it.
Yeah,
What
I'll give you
island
another.
is this?
The last example I would give is watch any Ultraman episode where somebody falls off a cliff. It is always the phoniest dummy you ever saw, but they're consistent about it because they didn't want to traumatize children. Even children would go, "Oh, that's a dummy. I don't have to have a nightmare."
Well, they did it in the Three Stooges too.
Yeah, well, that's a whole other.
Okay, so I've confused myself. What island is this? I got a theory, but it's not from a Toho movie. Is this the model from Gappa in the beginning of the movie when they're trying to sell that at the amusement park on the island? And it's going to look just like this?
That could be.
And what's Gappa? A rip-off of Gorgo.
Yeah.
Okay, so now we're trying to run out of time.
I think we've grounded into the earth. My thanks to Richard.
Nick, Archie. Thanks to Archie.
Nobody has
Archie is my name by only Archie. It's just Archie. It's not
Yeah,
Archie Waugh.
we decided this. It's been determined that I am the only Archie in Kaiju fandom. So, like Cher and Madonna, I am just Archie. The only Archie you need to know.
Check out episode of Monster Report with Richard as my guest. We talk about Godzilla versus Megalon, and he has a lot of interesting points to make in that episode.
Nick's Monster Report episodes are wonderful fun. Are they on YouTube?
YouTube.
Yeah.
I'll check that
Unfortunately, I
out.
didn't really like Megalon, so I'm not really...
That's a great time.